What's up, everybody? It's guubums back with another video. So there was a B patch like a couple days ago, I think on Tuesday or Wednesday, that aimed to nerf some of the best comps in the meta. For those of you guys who are unfamiliar with the B patch, it was mostly targeted at Ahri, at Nyla, some of the strongest comps, and then they also gave some nerf to Fiora and Nasus, which were some of the 4-cost comps. So now the meta is a little bit kind of like more settled down. I wanted to make a new video to kind of give you guys like a meta update. Just figured, I think the meta is like different enough post B patch and pre B patch that it's worth talking about and making a new guide. So kind of like the main takeaway from the B patch outside of like kind of like the strongest comps coming down was just like the nerf of 4 Vanguards. So 4 Vanguards is like something you played like almost all the time, just like in the mid game, just because of how strong it was and because of how strong the units are individually. Now that they nerfed that a little bit, then it's like it gives kind of like more way for like a different front lines to kind of emerge as kind of being dominated in the mid game. But for the most part, yeah, 4 Vanguards isn't really played all too much anymore. And the comps that kind of played around 4 Vanguards either play differently, either like they're not playing around 4 Vanguards or if they're like kind of just like a lower tier. So today I have a couple of 4-cost comps as well as a couple of reroll comps. This is like kind of like just a good illustration of what the meta really looks like at high elos. So I tried to split it up about as reasonably as I could, but yeah, for the most part, these are just going to be like the 6 best comps that you'll find at the highest elo. So yeah, if you guys like the content, please leave a like on the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment on what else you guys want to see. And yeah, let's get into the video. So the very first comp I have is Arcana Ryze. I believe this is like a comp that kind of came out of Europe. To my understanding, is like I mostly saw European players playing it when I was like kind of looking around and stuff. I didn't see it in NA that often, and even now I don't see it on NA that much. But it's just a comp playing around like Ryze Nami, and this is going to be like the first of 2 level 8 comps mostly, and this is probably going to be the stronger one of the 2. I'd say the issue right now with like going level 8 is that it's really difficult to find the spot for it in the early game. Oftentimes in the early game, so you don't take an econ augment on 2-1, you'll find yourself in a spot where you're like you can't really win streak. Like sometimes, you know, you'll win like 3 out of 5 of your first 5 fights, or maybe like you'll win 5 out of 7 of your first 7 fights, which is like pretty solid. But because your board doesn't actually have that much scaling into stage 3 or like kind of like late stage 3 especially, then your board can't really maintain its win streak throughout stage 3, and then getting to level 8 actually requires you to sacrifice some 30, 40, maybe even sometimes 50 HP just to get to level 8, and most of the time you don't actually have that much money anyway, just because, say, the portal didn't give you guys any gold, so you didn't take an econ augment on either 2-1 or 3-2. It just makes it really hard to go level 8. But that being said, when you actually make it to level 8, and more importantly level 9, it's really, really easy to make a board that actually wins the game. But I'd say in general, rerolls kind of like taking up a lot of the top 4 spots. Probably like one person going level 8 will probably win the game or top 2 the game, but normally like 3, 4, 5, maybe even 6 will all be reroll, and then chances are like the bottom 2 will most likely be a level 8 player as well. Obviously sometimes you're playing reroll, you don't hit and you go bot 2 as well, but I'd say like the general makeup of a high-low lobby in terms of placements will look like kind of like what I just described. And the thing with this comp specifically is that this comp is one of the higher cap comps in the game, just because pretty much angling a lot of legendaries. Like, okay, the level 8 board that I have shown here doesn't actually angle a lot of legendaries. Like, that's intentionally to kind of demonstrate like what you guys should look for as soon as you guys get to level 8 on 4-2, when you don't have lots of gold to either go 9 or like roll a lot on 8 for some of these 1-cost copies of these 5 costs. This is definitely what your board should look like. It's Ryze Nami carry with 4 Arcana, and most of the time I think you're going to be putting your Arcana on Tahm Kench for your team-wide AP. As you'll notice, this comp actually has a decent amount of traits. I believe it's 6, which is like pretty high. I think like 7 and above is like a lot of traits, but 6 and above, like 6 is normally kind of like the break point that makes trait specific augments or trait specific traits such as Arcana TK or like Stand United to be somewhat worth it. And yeah, I mean, this comp has 6 traits. Later on, when you move to Xerath, as soon as you have 3 procs of his charm, so I don't know if like I can show you guys the information for exactly how Xerath works, but the way it works is that for every 3 charms you buy throughout the game, your team does bonus true damage on their abilities. And mind you, it is abilities only, but obviously for a comp like this, all your damage is going to be coming from abilities. Only a minor amount of it is coming from auto attacks. This won't be true for, you know, say multi-strikers or like a Kalista based comp, right? But in this comp, it's going to be true damage basically for your whole team when you buff Xerath. And the breakpoint between Xerath and TK is generally around 3 charms. So for those of you guys who don't know, right now you're buying your 3rd charm around Krugs, your 6th charm around the start of stage 4, and then normally your 9th charm, you should have 9-ish charms, probably like between 7 to 10-ish charms by 5-1, and then by so you should be buying a charm every round from stage 5 onwards. So By around stage 6, you should have 15 charms purchased, and when you have 15 charms purchased, you have 5 stacks of Xerath Arcana, and then you're just getting a massive amount of true damage. I believe at this point it'll be like 21%, something along those lines. It depends. Like, I don't know the exact numbers just because it varies between the different levels of Arcana you're playing, obviously, right? So I know like some of the numbers for like the lower levels of Arcana, but I don't know for like all the higher levels. But pretty much in essence, it's you're expecting about like 15 to maybe like 25% extra damage coming from Xerath. And yeah, hitting that Xerath definitely really helps with this comp. But like Xerath is also the first unit you take out here, other than maybe Hecarim. Like if you're getting into late stage 5 and you have maybe like 12 to 15 charms bought, or Xerath over maybe like a Galio if you don't have Nami stacked up yet, or Nora yet, just because it's pretty reasonable to kind of like this type of board, but like you can't find the 5 costs yet. So yeah, you don't have those yet. But yeah, for the most part, this is going to be your level 8 board. The items you build are like pretty standard across like probably what you guys have seen on Ryze. The thing is, like, Shiv is actually good on Ryze, but there's a bug that makes it so he shreds your entire team. So like it's probably better to end up putting it on someone else. Normally it's going to be Nami or Xerath or Nora as well. So like it doesn't really matter if you put the Shiv on. Obviously, if you have Shiv, you don't have to build Spark, but one or the other is going to be quite beneficial. I think more often than not you're building Shiv just because tier items are not all that good on Ryze. So for the most part, like if you're used to playing around AP carries, even like someone like a Nami or like a Karma, then you really want that blue buff, you really want that Shojin. For Ryze, that's not true. Like you're not building Shojin all that often on Ryze. If you're building a Shojin, it's going to be for your Nami. So generally speaking, like the tier items aren't going to be all that important for Ryze specifically. Mostly just wants like AP, wants a source of anti-heal, whether that be red buff or Morello, it doesn't all that matter. If you built a Rage Blade in the early game, you can put on Ryze, but for the most part, Rage Blade Ryze is quite weak, despite like what a lot of people might think. It's a little bit stronger in like the 4 Scholar versions, but like for the most part, I'd say Rage Blade on Ryze is just like quite bad in general. But I mean, that won't stop people from building it, so I just figured I'd mention it in case like you can avoid it. But obviously, sometimes it's unavoidable to have a Rage Blade on Ryze, and that's like, it's not the worst thing in the world. It's just definitely not something you should be looking for. Yeah, I mean, this comp is about as straightforward as it gets. I think you're only playing this comp if you don't have Portal +1. If you do have Portal +1, then you should be playing like the A Portal version of Ryze, which obviously in those cases, most of the time you're dropping most of these Arcana units. The one you end up playing obviously is dependent on like which ones you hit. But like obviously, say you hit Diana 2, then you're going to be playing around Diana 2, and then you just put in like all the random portal units, fill out your portal so you have a spat on her, and then yeah, we're just calling it a day. And this is like the standard Ryze board. But once again, this is the board that you're trying to play, assuming you don't have that Portal +1. And it's going to be pretty strong just because of how high it caps. I think, like, if you're really looking to cap out this board, then you're going to be, like, swapping around some of the strong units in game. Obviously, like, you can actually just take out Taric entirely and say you have non-true tank items. So you could just have, like, I don't know, say something like this on Diana. If you can find a BT somewhere, that's perfect, like especially if this is Diana 2, right? Then opening selling your Taric is perfectly acceptable. Another thing is like you can actually drop out of some of the Arcana. You don't have to play it all the way up on Arcana, right? We could just start dropping Hecarim for Diana 2 if we still like our Taric 2, right? Like dropping a Taric 2 is pretty hard, especially if you have like pure tank items. But swapping to Diana is pretty reasonable so long as like you have these frontline AP bruiser type items, Spark, Crown Guard, BT, those types of adaptive helm maybe. Even just like Vow, just to get her cast off a little bit faster is really reasonable. Death Cap, all these items are going to be really good on Diana, assuming you can upgrade her. And yeah, for the most part, it's pretty simple. And then like as it gets to really, really late game, like we're talking like Xerath 2, level 9, like everyone's getting upgraded, then you definitely want to outfit Xerath with some of these items. Adaptive, Shojin, any mana item is going to do well. Obviously, any AP item is going to do well, and then your Xerath's good to go. And yeah, you'll probably win any game that you can get to like this point, but obviously getting to this point is a little bit easier said than done. So yeah, definitely look out for this if you guys are like win streaking early game, especially if you guys are playing around AP items. Certain augments that will help you get here could be like Patient Study, stuff that just helps you get level 8, Slam in, win streak. So Patient Study is more of a lost streak augment, but like Slam in, Epoch, these things that can help you win streak as well as push levels is a good way to get to this comp. The second comp that's going to be true for is something played around Kalista. So this is like the main Kalista Fiora board. This comp got like nerfed pretty dramatically in the B patch, but it's still not viable, but like definitely one of 2 calming 4-cost comps that you guys are likely to see, just because even though there have been buffs to Varus and there have been buffs to some of these other units, there hasn't been buff to a Karma, right? Like, so Karma's still not a good backline carry. Gwen is not really a good duo carry just because she hasn't really been buffed yet. Varus is still a little bit weak on the weaker side, too reliant on hitting like Smolder to be strong. And then Nami just struggles as a solo carry. So yeah, we're pretty much just playing around Kalista and Ryze as the only two like viable 4-cost backliners right now, just because the other ones are a little bit too reliant on all these different factors that you're not always going to be able to have access to. So this comp requires no spats. This is like your other basic level 8 comp that if you're kind of like streaking around AD items, so you have a Rage Blade, Last Whisper early, right? Like this is going to be the comp that you want to be playing. So you have a lot of bows early. This is going to be one of the comps that you want to be playing. I will talk about some of the other comps you might want to look for if you have those types of items, these AD attack speed items. But if you are playing for level 8, then this is going to be the comp that you're going to be looking for. And it's pretty basic stuff. You are pretty much purchasing these exact 8 units on level 8. There are a couple of other versions that, like, if you say you don't have Camille, you either play Jax or you play Hecarim. And in the case that you play Hecarim, I find that a lot of people like playing Hecarim and Shen. And then they play, instead of Zillion, you obviously lose Chrono in this case. This is worse because there's a couple reasons. One, you have a little bit too many melee units, so anything that like targets your backline is going to be like a little bit too favored towards your backline. Something like a Ryze on this corner will just hit your carry and do a lot of damage to it. Something like an Akali 3 will easily find its way to your backline just because you have one backliner, so it's a little bit worse. Having that Zillion protect your backliner as well as having Chrono, which is one of the better spot traits in the game right now, is probably a stronger way of going about this. And if you have that Camille 1, then Camille's 1 is just like really strong. So say you don't hit Fiora 2 on your initial roll down, especially if you have a remover, then you can actually just put all these items on a Camille 1 until you end up hitting Fiora 2, and she's actually going to service you quite well, especially on stage 4. She falls off a little bit stage 5, obviously at 1-star, but if you get her to 2-star, then that's going to be one of the main ways you're capping out with this board, right? There's not like all that much you're fitting in at 9. Like if you go level 9, most of the time people just fit Morgana, and they take out Nico for Briar. And this is the strongest way to cap around this board, but at the same time, like this is a little bit kind of out there just because it's impossible to have items for Camille, Briar, and Fiora all at once. So if you get a Briar 2, it's actually like perfectly acceptable to just sell Fiora. And in the case that you have Briar 2, and then you just move these 3 items to Briar, obviously Briar is going to be pretty strong in this case. But it's rare to like be able to find a spot to be able to do stuff like this, just because it's rare to be able to get to level 9 with that much gold. But yeah, for the most part, this is like pretty straightforward comp. If you have like, you put AD melee bruiser items on Fiora, that looks like BT, Starax, Edge of Night, Titan's a little bit bad in general as an item, but like Titans is like kind of fine on Fiora. Most of the time you won't be building Titans though, just because you kind of want to reserve your bows for Kalista. Because in this case that you don't have Last Whisper on Kalista, then you probably want a red buff on her instead of a Last Whisper. Double Rage Blade is perfectly acceptable. Rage Blade, Death Blade, GS, all this fun stuff is pretty acceptable. But for the most part, you either want Last Whisper or red buff, just because you kind of want that those utility kind of debuffs that really help your team. And there's just not that many other units on this team to like put red buff. I think you can put a Morello on Morgana if you have one, but it's pretty difficult to do so just because Morgana 1 doesn't consistently cast, and you can't really afford to put other tank items on her just because your Nasus does kind of demand those tank items. And it is fine to put a lot. So if you, in the case you have red buff, Last Whisper, and Rage Blade, a little bit rare just because like this obviously requires 4 bows, but you can actually just like put Last Whisper on Fiora and call it a day. It's not going to be the most consistent thing in the world, but it's like perfectly acceptable to do something like this. Obviously you still need anti-heal somewhere, right? So when you don't have like say a Sunfire or Morello on the Morgana Zillion, something like that, then this is going to be the best way of you getting that anti-heal while still making sure that your units have the items that they need. So yeah, this Briar is just Fiora. It doesn't really matter which one you play. Obviously, the upgraded one matters the most, and same idea for Camille. But predominantly, you are just going to be looking for this exact board on 8, and then once you get to level 9, you're going to just like be able to like find a way to cap out your board based on like what 4-5 cost upgrades you hit, right? So yeah, this is the other level 8 comp. And now we're getting into the reroll comps, and these are all reroll comps that like I'm sure you guys have some familiarity with. So this is one of the reroll comps that they actually nerfed in the B patch, but and pretty much no shock. It's still pretty OP after the nerfs. It's like a really strong comp in general. You're pretty much playing around Nyla 3, Akali 3, and Katarina 3. And this comp is like pretty augment specific. So stuff like keepers, stuff like anything that gives like melee strength. Just like there's a lot of them. So like melee strength might mean like row rejuvenation, stuff like that. Find your center. Some of these like melee specific augments are actually pretty reasonable in this comp, which is like obviously not very true for like a lot of other comps. So like row regeneration is not something you'll ever be taking if you're not playing this comp, but it's actually pretty good in this comp just because you're playing like a full row of melee units, and then it's still not that good, but it's like something to look for. But keepers is definitely going to be the main one. Trade sector, like anything that helps you reroll is also really good. You have my sword, anything that gives you sword. Unleash the beast, which is the Starax specific augment, gives you a Starax and buffs your Starax. Starts making Starax very bis on both of these units. Not today, which is the Guardian Angel or sorry, Edge of Night specific augment that dramatically buffs your GA, and you should definitely put this on both of them in the case that you have that. So there's a lot of augments that like make it so this comp specifically is a lot stronger than it otherwise would be. And those are definitely like kind of the augments you need to be looking for as your direction for playing this comp. Obviously, if you open the game with a couple Nylas, Nyla happens to be a really strong early game unit because one, because how she functions, like melee bruisers tend to be pretty strong if you can get those melee items on them early. So that looks like BT, looks like Sterax, but also just because she has the Eldritch trait, and you know, Eldritch is probably one of the strongest openers in the game in terms of just pure board strength. So it's pretty normal to find yourself like streaking in the early game with this comp, but yeah, it's pretty straightforward comp. You just want like Last Whisper IE on Nyla. It's like slightly worse to put BT on her, apparently, but BT is still like perfectly acceptable. Like you shouldn't take that as a sign to like not build BT on her. It's just, I believe, like if you could choose your items, BT is not one of her best 3 items. It's like kind of like in the 4th to like 6th range of her best items, which is still obviously fantastic, but it just means that like you shouldn't be building BT as frequently on her as you probably would expect, just because she's like kind of like that melee bruiser type unit. If you do put BT on her though, I would recommend you frontline her, but otherwise, like if you're building like this Last Whisper IE build or Last Whisper Deathblade GS, like 3 damage items, you want to put her in the second row, just because like obviously she doesn't have that nearly as much healing, but it's still like fine to put her in the front row just because like most of the time she'll dash backwards, and she also has a chance to like wrap the enemy backline, and in the cases obviously where she's wrapping enemy backline, then you're just going to kill the enemy carry and the fight's going to be over in like 3 seconds, right? But yeah, otherwise normally she just like jumps backward, heals up with 4 warrior a bit, and then towards the end of the fight, when we're getting to those like 2v2 versus like or like 1v1 situations at the end of fights, Nyla will still generally have most of her HP, so it's like pretty reasonable to like just build full damage and still be fine. But obviously, as I mentioned previously, those like item specific augments that boost like an item, Not Today and Unleash the Beast, are really strong in this comp, just because this comp happens to have many units or several units, 2 units that can take advantage of those, and those augments are just already really strong. Assuming you have a single unit that can take advantage of them, and then you can actually itemize a 3rd unit. In very rare cases where like you have a lot of items, you can put items on Fiora and Katarina as well. Obviously, Katarina only needs 2 items because the 3rd item will always be this Fairy Crown, assuming you get to level 8. But even on level 6, so say you don't hit Kalista, you're playing around Shen Hekrab, you can actually just take out one of these guys for Lilia. I still get Lilia and Seraphine mixed up, but yeah, Lilia, you take this in, and then obviously your 3rd item is going to be a Fairy Crown, right? And Katarina is going to be pretty strong as well. I believe the kind of like newer-ish way of playing around this comp is like you play for one of Nyla or Akali, depending on which one you can have 3-star, and then you kind of like more aggressively than before go level 7 to play for around a Cat 3 carry. Cat 3 is a little bit strong. Obviously, this comp did receive a nerf in Nyla, but Cat 3 is pretty strong after the buffs in the previous patch before that, so it's pretty strong way to go about it, and it gives you a more consistent odds of hitting Fiora, Gwen, and Kalista, which you'll obviously need to hit for Warrior, and Warrior spat ends up not being all that fantastic for this comp just because 6 Warrior is just not that strong of a buff, honestly. Yeah, it's just like not that good, but it's fine. Like if you do get Warrior Crown, it's fine to put it on your Kalista, and then at level 8 you just play 6 Warrior with Hecarim and with Gwen or Fiora, whichever one you're missing on your level 7 board. But yeah, this is a pretty straightforward comp as well. Your standard reroll comp, you guys have already seen this. Not too much to talk about. Next up, we have Viegar Vex. Okay, this is like the most standard of the reroll comps, probably. And yeah, I mean, you're just playing for Vex 3, Viegar 3 on level 7. And the way this comp works is that you just really want to be buying your charms every round. So the way Viegar works is you gain 3 AP for every charm you buy. Once again, on your average cadence, you're expected to buy 3 charms by Krugs, 6 charms by Wolves, and around like 10 to 11 charms by like stage 5. And the thing with Viegar is that like you actually want to like make sure that that's even, it's like you're buying even more charms than that. So like on stage 3 you should already be starting to roll on level 6, especially like pretty much every turn for that charm, and you just buy like whatever cheap charm you can afford. Whatever cheap charm they give you is fine. You don't necessarily need to go for like the highest combat power or the most expensive ones. Generally the most expensive ones are going to be the worst, outside of the ones that are like, you know, assembly, which costs 10 gold, but obviously it gives you 4 extra gold if you buy it. Yeah, anyways, you just want to be playing charms until you actually like buying charms every turn, even like before you have a Veigar on your board, just because it all adds up. And the scaling for it is like so non-insignificant that yeah, pretty much it just makes a big deal late game once you actually hit your 3 stars to scale your Veigar, because you essentially are giving your Veigar a 4th item by the end of the game, right? Like say you buy like 10-15 charms by the end of the game, that's 45 AP. Deathcat gives 50 AP, roughly closer to like the 70-ish, depending on like how you value damage amp, but like somewhere in that like 60 to 70 AP range, or 60 to 80 AP range. So yeah, definitely makes up for like half a third item, so it's definitely really strong. And yeah, this is pretty simple. The one advice I'd give for this comp is like try not to pivot into Veigar too early. So in the early games, like say you have a Seraphine 2 and you're playing around something that gives you fairy, like whether it be, it's probably gonna be like Lilia or something, but like say you have a Lilia on your board with no Bastion, you just carry Lilia with some of these items, or sorry, Seraphine with some of these items, and she's gonna perform a lot better than Veigar until like pretty like mid to late into the game. Once you get 5 mage, once you get like 3 Peasant's Law Veigar items, then you can swap. But Seraphine has the benefit of being AoE. She has the benefit of only requiring 2 items instead of 3. So, and Veigar also scales. So, yeah, definitely don't pivot into Veigar too early. I see this mistake made by even a lot of challenger players where they're like, oh, I have a Veigar, like I should pivot into Veigar. It's like, no, you should not. Veigar is really, really weak at 1 and 2 star. Much stronger at 3 star. At like 2 star 3 item, you should probably pivot into it. But at like 2 star 1 item, probably shouldn't pivot into Veigar, because in most cases you'll actually have to sell your Seraphine. Obviously, you lose your 5 mage in those cases, or you have to downgrade it. Doesn't also feel that good. Veigar will probably start killing more units late stage 3, but up until like around 3-3, Seraphine's definitely the better unit to carry. And just that's not something like too many people know about, I feel like, but definitely something to kind of like help you get more success with this comp, just because like, dude, I see everyone kind of like sell it for Veigar and then like they just start losing every single fight on stage 3 and taking a lot of damage. That being said, like Seraphine is one of those units that will not kill anything if you have a really weak board, so this demands that you have some sort of frontline, and that goes to that kind of like easily transitions me to the next advice I want to give, which is like don't pivot into Vex too early. So Vex and Veigar both struggle from the same issue of like they're both really good at 3 star 3 item, but as like for any like one less step you have below that, they get significantly weaker. So Vex 2 generally not very strong. Vex 2 with 2 items even weaker. So most of the time, like you're actually playing around like something like a Vanguard in the early mid game. So obviously Veigar's a B, and Blitzcrank 2 is significantly tankier than Vex 1. So if you have like items on a Blitzcrank 2, so your Spark and Gargoyles, your Blitzcrank's gonna go a lot further than your than your Vex will, and you still get like decent synergies with Galio and like say Seraphine, so you're just playing 2 or 3 mage, obviously depending on which one you have. In most cases it's going to be Soraka just because it's the lowest cost, but you can play like 3 or 4 Vanguards in the early mid game, and then yeah, you just pivot to Vex and Veigar as soon as you have like around 2-ish items and they're at least 2 star. You should almost never be putting items on a Veigar and Vex 1, just because assuming you're not loose streaking, those are just like really weak units to put your items on, and eventually you will transition your items into them like as they get upgraded, as they get more items. But yeah, definitely do not like put too much emphasis on putting the items on these guys early. It's just not going to be beneficial to your game. All right, next up we have a Jinx Wukong build. This is like Hunter Wukong Jinx, or Hunter Jinx Wukong, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. Pretty standard stuff. You're just rolling for this on 7. Jinx 3 and Wukong 3 are your best carries. Kog'Maw 3 is like pretty valuable, but is going to be like kind of like the follow-up, because you can actually just stack Olaf instead of Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw and Jinx have like similar items, so it's like really weird to find yourself in a spot where you'll have Kog'Maw and Jinx items. Jinx items just Rageblade, Hurricane +1, Giant Slayer, Deathblade, second Rageblade, second Hurricane are all good. There is a Hurricane specific augment that gives you a Hurricane, that buffs Hurricane, called Category 5. Fantastic augment for this comp. Gives you one of your main items right away, and it gives a big buff to that item. So if you go like double Hurricane, Rageblade, Jinx with that, you'll have to find an even shroud somewhere, most likely, or like a Lost Whisper on like say your Kog'Maw, but you still want to build Lost Whisper Shogun on Kog'Maw. But in the case that you don't have that, you can just put Lost Whisper on Jinx, perfectly fine. You can put Lost Whisper on Olaf, it's like kind of fine. And yeah, and then Wukong items, just your basic Stone Plate, +1, doesn't really matter. Redemption generally I think is the best one, but you know, Warmogs is fine, even Shroud is fine. Anything that like gives him armor and armor is fine. Just like generic 10 stacks, but you need at least 1 Stone Plate, or else this unit pretty much doesn't even work. This unit is like the biggest Stone Plate abuser. This unit, these two both are not this one, but Vex and Wukong are just like Stone Plate abusers. You kind of like really need to have at least like 1 Stone Plate on them, just to like, that's just kind of like how their ability and how their mechanic work as champions. So pretty important. But yeah, this is pretty self-explanatory. You just go level 7 and roll for these. This comp has the benefit of being like pretty strong on 2 stars, and actually even decently strong on 1 stars. If you say you have like Wukong and Jinx early, like stage 2, assuming you have the items for it. But it's like slightly lower max cap. Like I don't think like 3-star everyone with this comp will like always win games, whereas like 3-star this comp will frequently win games, assuming you have like 2 to 3 lives to like play with, assuming you can get to late game to play fit around Xerath. obviously like in this comp, like you're buying a lot of charms throughout your game. So when you get to play Xerath and you play Arcana, then Xerath's giving you like 15 to like 25% true damage on all your team. Once again, this team is like full of casters, so it's gonna be really strong in that way. This comp doesn't have like a really like seamless way of like camping out in the same way. I think most of the time you're just gonna be playing around like Diana or any 5 cost that you have that can give you any sort of power. But it's not like this comp where just like one copy of Xerath dramatically boosts your cap, as well as the 3-star Veigar, 3-star Vex already being strong, and then 3-star Wukong and 3-star Jinx. But that being said, Wukong and Jinx are really quite strong. You will be able to get a lot of top 2s with this comp. It's just slightly lower cap than the previous comp mentioned, but still really good. And finally, the last comp, in a shock to probably not that many people, it's Ahri. And guess what the B patch aimed to nerf? Ahri. I believe Ahri got the largest nerf of the B patch. She remains the single best comp in the game, which is this comp. You just don't play the Vanguard version anymore. You always play this Bastion version, roll on 5. You go for Zoe 3, Ahri 3, Lilia 3, and Poppy 3. And then you put your you put Hecarim in on 5, and you put your Arcana on Ahri pretty much the entire game. In this comp, you actually don't switch it to Xerath. And okay, the reason for that pretty much is like Xerath is like damage only, but if you actually put the Arcana on Ahri, the damage amounts to about the same until around, I believe, I want to say it's you need like 15 charms bot or like 12 charms bot, so 4 procs of Xerath, 4 to 5 ish procs of Xerath to start breaking even into the damage front. But the AP provided by Ahri is only 20% is damage on Ahri, but it's actually slightly significantly more on like a Zoe or on like any of your other units that you happen to be fielding. But also it gives a lot of defensive utility to your front line. So Lilia and Poppy both heal and shield respectively based on the amount of AP they have, right? So Xerath does not boost that, but Ahri does. So yeah, for the most part, you're just like always keeping Ahri Arcana. The issue with this comp is that the items are extremely inflexible. You pretty much always want to have adaptive death cap on Ahri. The third item is like slightly more flexible. You can have like GS, blue buff, and some of these other options. Shojin ends up being really, really bad on her. Nashor's ends up being pretty bad on her. But yeah, like there's like a little bit of flexibility for the third item, but you really want the adaptive death cap on her. And it's pretty much like the difference between having an adaptive death cap on your Ahri and not is pretty big deal. A lot of people start asking like, okay, so if I don't have that many Ahris and I have Zoe 3, should I start stacking Zoe 3? I would say no, you should not start stacking Zoe 3. It's much better to still stack Ahri and go for Ahri 3-star. But you know, I still see some people do it. You generally just want to have like leftover items on Zoe. Like if you randomly get a blue buff or an Asher's or something like that, it's like perfectly acceptable to like start putting some on Zoe. But late game, most of the time you're gonna have like a Ryze or something, like a Xerath or something, that you can just throw your items on. And in those cases, like yeah, you just still want your stacked Ahri for single target damage, but those units will kind of like give you more of a spread overall damage to your team. And yeah, you just stack whichever one of these guys you have 3-star first. I put random items on them, but like obviously we know that any generic tank item will do. You want some sort of shred somewhere, so whether that be Shiv or Spark, that's fine. Generally speaking, if you go anti-heal, you're going to be building either a Sunfire or it'll be look like a Red or Morello on a Ryze late game. So if you say you have a Ryze, then obviously putting Red and Morello on him is perfectly fine. He's going to spread it quite well. But neither of these units also spread it that well, so you're not really building Red and Morello on these units. So yeah. But because this comp is like so front to back, like Sunfire ends up being okay. But I wouldn't be building Sunfire until like I've secured like proper tank items and proper Ahri items. And yeah, this comp is like about as straightforward as it gets. You just always want to be playing 4 Bastion. Late game, you want to like make sure you're pivoting into like Diana Tarek. Obviously, these are the late game Bastions, and then you just want to be playing as many Arcana as possible. 4 Scholars, okay, but like it's generally not that good, just because like it's not that good of a trait. But the units end up being pretty high value. So like Milio and Ryze are both fantastic units in the late game. But yeah, I mean, you just played it to your own discretion, and then just bear in mind the thing I taught you guys last time about positioning around Ahri. You just want like some sort of dynamic like this, because the way it works is that the enemy units will wrap around this Tarek, and Ahri will be ulting like 2 to 3 units. And yeah, that's the video. A little bit of a longer one, talking about a lot of different comps. But if you guys like the video, again, please leave a like. Please subscribe. If you guys want to find more of me, just follow me on Twitch, follow me on Twitter. If you guys click the link in my description, you can find my Discord, where I do coaching, I do a couple other video ideas, a couple like video previews, stuff like that. And yeah, until next time, peace.